2 years in a row, where in fact, many people showed up for a discussion of the 5-paragraph essay. And we said, what is going on, right? In other words, haven't we done away with the 5-paragraph essay? And apparently the answer is no. All right, so Nigel and I talked to Kelly at University of Michigan Press and said, how about putting together these outstanding authors whom you are going to see today and some others that you have seen before, and ask them to write something about the 5-paragraph essay, but we thought we'd had to go beyond that. And so what we have in the chapters is a kind of laying of the groundwork, and you'll see that as you read, or you've already seen it, citing some relevant research, and then making really practical suggestions for what we might do in the classroom beyond the 5-paragraph essay. And we're very proud of this group of authors that we've been kind enough to write. First of all, well, there are all kinds of reasons for that, but one is the sort of varied theoretical stances. We have systemicists, right? You know who you are. We have some ESP people, and I try to sometimes represent rhetorical genre studies. But the point is, we didn't talk about theory so much, but we like having that breadth of theory represented. Secondly, we're really happy that our various authors picked up certain topics. You'll see with Hayes and Ferris, for example, the issue of transfer, right? And one of the really important things about transfer is, of course, it's one of our major jobs, and we've really got to learn much more about it and do more research on it. So that's a very nice piece. Then we have my own fixation on audience and context. I don't think we're doing enough, and I think a lot of other people would agree with me. Silvia and Tom has some very interesting work on the fact that students misread prompts. Boy, am I having trouble with that, you guys. Anyway, they think that they're supposed to go straight to argumentation, and in fact, they may have to do analysis or whatever it happens to be. Chris Feak, don't miss her, even though she's talking about graduate students, because in fact, she's talking about authors positioning themselves in text. Who are they vis-a-vis their audiences? And I don't think here again, we spend enough time on it. So it's a very rich collection that you're going to hear about today. And I think each of us have got a topic that goes in a different direction that we need to consider. So let's go ahead from there, Sarah.
Sounds good. I think Dana and Hogan, if you want to get us started.
Yeah, and I'm gonna, we have a few slides to guide us through our overview, so I'm gonna
okay, great.
Hold them up as soon as I find them. Give me a second. I was just saying, I'm feeling a little rusty on Zoom after the summer. The heck? Okay. So we are chapter 6 of the book, and originally this book was going to be part of the myths collection that Michigan has done, and so we were supposed to talk about the myth of transfer. And so basically our thesis in the chapter is that neither writing transfer theory nor our own experience predict that students learning the 5-paragraph essay formula will successfully transfer skills to more complex or drastically different writing tasks in the future. And you can see what the outline of the chapter is. It follows the outline of the other chapters in the book. My intro was about my own experience with my advanced composition students a few years ago, juniors and seniors taking an advanced writing course. And as a warm-up early in the course, I asked them to read an article called Unteaching the 5-Paragraph Essay and respond to a short answer question. You can see it here on the slide. They're just to sort of reflect on their own experiences with the 5-paragraph essay. I analyzed the responses. I had 2 sections, 41 students total. 28 of them said they felt that in their experience as advanced college writers who could reflect a little bit on what they'd been taught and how it had or had not helped them in college, they said they thought it was harmful. 5 thought it was helpful, and 8 had mixed reactions. And in the other column, you can see some of the themes I identified from their answers. And the one in blue is the only positive theme toward the 5-paragraph essay. And you can see, and if you read the chapter, we have a bunch of quotes from these students that are pretty informative about and thoughtful about what they thought. I had to cut this out of the chapter for space, but the other piece of experience that informed me is I was director of the first-year composition program for a number of years and was always really struck by the lack of confidence, lack of self-efficacy that first-year students at UC Davis brought into college about their writing. Just completely convinced they couldn't write. They were terrible writers. They hated writing. And these are highly successful, motivated, students, and yet they felt terrible about themselves with writing. So those 2 things, plus my advanced comp students, really made me question some of the issues about what they had learned before coming to college. But the most interesting part of the chapter is Hogan's part, which is about the writing transfer theory. And I actually invited him to co-author this with me because he had done his dissertation on it, and I had worked with him on his dissertation. I'm going to kick it to him. And I think, Hogan, should I go ahead and unshare, or should I just, what do you want me to do?
I could either share. Yeah, why don't we? That way I don't have to ask you to click for slides, which always feels a little.
So, okay.
All right. See, I've got this.
Hopefully you'll be better at getting it up than I was.
We'll see. We'll see. I don't know. I've got. Of course, I have a little bit of an issue because what would this be without a few issues? Okay. Show all. There we go. No. Maybe. Let's see here. I am right here. Good. No, I'm not. Sorry, everybody. I'm having. There it is. There it is. Thank you for your patience. So if we just take a look, where I wanted to start the discussion on the research was just this idea that.
Hey, Hogan, sorry to bug you. Can you hit present? Oh, there you go. Awesome.
There you go. Yeah. So what I wanted to basically start the conversation on is the faulty assumptions that led to the 5-paragraph essay. Well, okay, one faulty assumption that led to the 5-paragraph essay taking the stage the way it has historically. And it's this idea that that a lot of educators operated under a faulty assumption about the ease of knowledge transfer. This idea, knowledge transfer is, students always think they're in the target context, but we should always make sure we understand there's a learning context and a target context. And knowledge transfer, learning transfer is the idea that what they learn in the learning context has some impact on a target context. And for us, it's the future, where they're going to write next, whether that be later in the semester, later in the term, or next year. But students always see themselves in the target context. They're performing now using their prior knowledge, which I really think speaks to what Dana was talking about that sense of that the students don't have the confidence in their writing they're doing at that moment. And how does that speak to their knowledge of the 5-paragraph essay, which a lot of our students are really familiar with because they've learned it as though it's a genre. They've learned it as though it is a repeated exigency that they have to address. And because they've learned it that way, they believe that it should move pretty easily into these other settings. Composition pedagogy was designed under this faulty assumption that transfer will happen easily. But that was an untested assumption. And eventually in the early 80s, we had some cognitive psychologists who tested it and found, oh no, it doesn't transfer easily. That's going to be an issue. And it was, and a number of rhetoricians and compositionists started looking at it, and it pushed forward the post-process movement and a lot of other ideas in theory that gave us this idea that maybe we should examine this idea of general writing skills instruction. In order to understand maybe how we look at the utility or lack of utility of general writing skills instruction, we should think about the type of transfer that people are assuming happens. And it's this idea of similarity transfer, meaning that the assumption on similarity transfer is that students will recognize the similarities between two contexts. They'll see that similarity and they will act on it and they will make the appropriate choices. And so when we have students practice over and over again the 5-paragraph essay, supporting their arguments using quotes for their literary analysis in an English course, and they produce a number of these 5-paragraph essays, the assumption is when they move into first-year composition or into an advanced composition course, where they'll be asked to provide support for claims using evidence, they'll remember, oh, I used to use quotes in my literary analysis, and so that's kind of like what I'm doing here. And so they'll make that connection and they'll recognize, okay, so I'm going to do some version of that. The problem is that the way we present support in the 5-paragraph essay is this discrete skill for this non-genre of the 5-paragraph essay, where the audience is really assessing your writing ability. They're not trying to interact with the genre in a purpose-driven or a rhetorical way. So they're not thinking in terms of audience awareness. They're not thinking in terms of what evidence does my audience value or how are they analyzing the evidence. And you start to find folks on a spectrum of near to far transfer. So that similarity transfer assumes that students are going to be able to recognize the similarities, but when you introduce this spectrum from Barnett and Cece's piece on near and far transfer, you start to recognize that as on different types of knowledge, as the distance between the learning context and the target context grows, it becomes more difficult to recognize the similarities. When I did my dissertation, it was really clear because I was looking at biology students who were doing a lot of their writing in short answers on handwritten midterms, and they had to draw tables and graphs and diagrams to present evidence of their claims, to support their claims. This is such a stretch in distance from what they were learning in terms of like placing a quote, and then providing analysis after the quote. And the expectation is, oh no, it's still using evidence, but the distance is so great that these students didn't see what they were doing in their biology classes writing. Interestingly, neither did their professors. A lot of people, one of the professors, when I was asking permission, was basically said, they don't do any writing in this class. So there's this persistent idea that because the distance is so large, there isn't anything to transfer, which is what leads us to this idea of what kind of teaching in a learning context does facilitate further transfer or more distant transfer. There have been a number of studies working towards this goal, and books written by compositionists and rhetoricians who have looked at the complexity of writing across different contexts and looked for ways of teaching towards that by explicitly teaching towards transfer, by getting students to abstract principles out of what they've learned and apply it in different contexts. And what this led my research towards was an idea that came out of Martin and Schwartz's work in 2013, when they described dynamic transfer, which is this idea that what moves across contexts are the abstract concepts that we glean from completing concrete tasks in one area. You use the resources you have in that one area to complete a concrete task, and it helps you understand the abstract concepts behind writing in that area. And you can bring those with you into a new context, but the new concrete task is going to require you to be resourceful enough to find new resources in the new context. and grab those tools. Some of those tools may still be available. Writing centers are typically available to students from undergraduate through graduate programs. Peer review, if students can arrange it or professors are encouraged to use it, can exist in both contexts. But prompts change, instructors' methods change, the rhetorical situation changes. And so the students need to gather the abstract concepts and apply them to those concrete tasks. And those concrete tasks are where I think it might be good to go back to the latter part of the chapter that Dana wrote about what is the practical application of this. So I'll stop sharing as well.
Dana, did you want to
Yes, I'm gonna
highlight
wrap
some
it
of
up.
those? Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Like I said, I feel really rusty about Zoom. So the big issue with the 5-paragraph essay, and Nigel Caplan's chapter early in the book kind of got at this too, is, well, if we don't have the 5-paragraph essay as a structure or a formula, what do teachers and students do instead? And so the last part of the chapter kind of answers that question, or attempts to, and the short version is use authentic genres and models and move from there. Kind of the takeaway, the last thing I'll say is teaching authentic genres in the way that we give an extended example at the last part of the chapter, in my experience, isn't any harder than learning how to teach students the 5-paragraph essay. At some point you have to learn how to do that. Students have to learn how to do that. You can do the same thing with authentic genres. It's not any harder, it's just new, you know, and it's a lot more fun and a lot more engaging. And the theory predicts that it's a lot more useful in the long run. So that's where we're gonna leave it. And thanks.
Great. We'll pick it back up with hopefully some questions at the end. Anne, I'm going to pull up your visual.
Anne, I think you're muted.
How about this? What actually goes on in the academic classroom? And I think more than anybody else in this group, I have spent more time asking that question just because I've had more time to do it. All right. This particular rhetorical planning wheel, it has been developed to sort of ask that question. But I think we have to back up a little and ask this question, and that is, how do we find out what's going on? How do our students find out? What, in fact, they'll be required to do and how in each academic classroom in which they enter. That famous Bartholomew way is each time you walk into a university classroom, you have to reinvent it. Of course, now it's each time you do it on Zoom. But the point is that you really have to rethink this every time. And I think it's most difficult, this transfer issue or figuring out what's happening in the classroom, with what I call in this chapter 7, the interstices. That is between the sort of high school testing, whatever you 5-paragraph essay kind of thing, often in the case, and you're going into your major, which Sylvia and Tom will deal with later. What are they being asked to do? What kinds of assignments are they getting? And basically, I've had a lot of criticism because people think I teach a study skills course. But in many ways, what you have to do is have your students collect the syllabi from other courses, analyze who the audience is through the syllabi and through listening to lectures. I have in my chapter all kinds of questions you can ask of what's going on here, and then examining the tasks. And some of this, we already know from the work by Meltzer and Nessie and Gardner and others, that task variety is a real problem. And preferences of faculty is a real issue. So we really have to ask this series of questions, which incidentally appear in a manuscript that Nigel and I have built upon what you all have done, and we have done ourselves, called Essential Actions in Academic Writing. This is a textbook that we have just sent off to University of Michigan Press. And basically, these are the questions students need to ask. And two of them that I think we're paying very little attention to, but the RGS people pay a lot of attention to, are audience. Who is this person you're writing for? What are her preferences? What kinds of concepts does she organize? What kinds of writing is required? And what we are discussing in the internices is often it's timed writing in the classroom. So what I'm presenting in this chapter are possibilities for ways in which students can work on timed writing in a time situation where they're taking an exam. I have one little story to tell, although I have many of them. One is that I had a group of anthropology students. They were all registered in anthropology class, and I was teaching their writing class. They were asked to take an essay exam. Can you guess what they did? We have always wondered. They began it with a 5-paragraph essay. I had one student who passed that part of the exam because they did this whole business about, you know, the 5-paragraph essay structure. It said essay, and so they went ahead and did it. So we spend a lot of time in my classroom looking at prompts,
Is it just Anne who's frozen?
Yeah, I think
constructing.
so.
She just froze on my screen just now.
Oh
Yeah.
dear, it says my internet is unstable.
Oh, you're back.
Turn your video off, Anne. You should be have a lot more bandwidth then.
Really, is that how you do it?
Yep.
Mhm. Yeah.
So go to stop video, and then we can hear your voice, but we won't be able to see you.
That is very interesting. I should do that in the classroom as well. Okay, back to this. So we spend a lot of time thinking about what's in the prompt they're given, or what are they being asked to do in the writing tasks if they can get hold of them. And then they practice going to the instructor and asking questions about those elements in the text that they don't understand, they don't know, they're not told. So basically, we're working on analyzing your audience, looking at the tasks that the audience requires, going to your audience. And interacting with her or him about what it is. Help students look at the entire panoply of elements in a task, and then to go to a particular context and ask the question, what's going on here? All right. So that's basically my chapter. It's very much written for the freshman student, or, well, actually it's written for anybody, but basically this period when they're doing kind of whatever kind of writing, and they really have to analyze it to begin to understand it without the help of having disciplinary background to make decisions. Okay. All right. That's it.
Thanks, Anne. Let's build off of that and let Tom and Sylvia talk a little bit more specifically about writing in the disciplines. Sylvia, oh, there you are.
Tom will start. So I don't know what happened to him.
Tom not here? He was
I was trying to avoid looking like a football coach, but I'm gonna Just have to deal with it. So yes, and I will start us off. Let me get these slides up here real quick.
Yeah.
And now my screen went blank. Okay, there we go. Sorry, my screens went blank again. Okay. Doesn't look like it wants to let me do presenter view. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I think our work really kind of dovetails nicely with what Anne was talking about. And in Qatar, we have a undergraduate university with only around 400 students. So we get to actually collaborate with the disciplinary professors and find out what exactly is going in their classroom, go in those classrooms ourselves. And that really helps us to do things that help to prepare students to write in the disciplines. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of some of the kind of key problems that we were trying to address in our chapter, a little bit of the, just touch on the solutions that we were thinking about providing. And then Silvia is going to talk about how we've been kind of applying some of these things that we've been learning in our own first year writing class to get students a little bit better prepared for the kinds of writing that they will see. So as Anne mentioned with Meltzer and Nessie and Gardner, we know from our own research and also these other kind of large scale studies, the disciplinary writing is just too diverse to cover in any single EAP or first year writing class. So with all the genres that students produce across the disciplines, from short answer assignments to more apprentice-like, kind of closer to professional genres, to kind of unpack all of the language resources needed to meet all these genres. The expectations for these genres is just beyond what we can do. So really in our chapter, well, and then we also know from our own research especially that students, if things are not explicit to students, they are confused about when they're supposed to just kind of show that they understood a reading, display agreed upon knowledge, and when they're supposed to kind of transform it, do things with it by analyzing or arguing. And so with our chapter, we were really trying to show some ways in which we can teach students how to go a little, to do the same thing that Anne's talking about, to kind of unpack the prompts so that they understand what they're being asked to do so they don't get that wrong, and also to kind of recognize how there are certain kind of language patterns that might be common to multiple genres across the disciplines, even though they're going to have their own particularities in terms of the organization and language choices, but kind of what commonalities are there that we can teach them, given that the 5-paragraph essay is insufficient and doesn't do that. So we draw on Humphrey and Economou's onion model, which talks about, which kind of sees language patterns that they describe in their chapter as interdependent and interlayered. So if the assignment asks for argument, but the student only describes, then they're kind of, or kind of reports on agreed upon knowledge, then they aren't really meeting the assignment expectations, and they are just kind of stuck in that kind of knowledge display mode. And so that's what we see a lot, in our research in history, when they're expected to write arguments, but they just kind of show that they understood the reading. And so, and then we, with this onion model, we found it very kind of powerful to let students know that no matter what discipline they are writing in, that discipline's going to have its classificatory frameworks, its disciplinary frameworks for analyzing the kind of raw data of that discipline, whatever it is. So we found that just kind of making students aware of what a disciplinary framework is, and how it can be used to organize an analysis is a very kind of powerful tool for them to learn, and then also helping them understand the relationship between analysis and argument, and how analysis can be used in service of an argument when students are kind of organizing their text around claims and support. And so instead of just kind of taking you through exactly everything that we did in the chapter, we thought it might be useful for Silvia to take over and give a little bit of information about the ways in which we kind of incorporated some of these things that we've been arguing about in modification to our first year writing class, and that we've
And Tom, keep sharing. I'll keep sharing. I'll tell
okay.
you. Yes.
Okay, sure.
I meant to tell you that earlier.
Yep.
Yes. So in the interest of time, you guys can go and read the chapter. This is kind of like a preview of things that we're working on right now based on all the research that we've done on writing in the disciplines. So in our 101 class, in our first year writing class, the students have to write a synthesis. And right now we're not just calling it a synthesis, but we're calling it an analytical synthesis. And this diagram that you see here is something that we were using in information systems classes when students had to write a case analysis, in organizational behavior classes when students had to write also a case analysis or a case proposal, where they had to apply disciplinary frameworks to the study of a case. In this case, we have this analytical synthesis assignment in which, we start here from the left, in which the students get the assignment guidelines, and the class topic is inequality. So we read a lot about inequality around the world, and then the students have to explain inequality in their synthesis using the disciplinary framework of Bourdieu's capital. So we learn about Bourdieu's capital first as a framework for us to understand inequality. We read about economic inequality, racial inequality, class inequality, gender inequality, and then the students in their synthesis, they have to explain inequality through the lens of Bourdieu. So we tell them that in order to do that, they have to, really unpack all the readings and see what from the information that we read and discussed, relates to one of the elements of the framework: economic capital, or social capital, or cultural capital, or social class reproduction. Okay, so that's the analytical work that we do. We tease apart the readings and we apply the lens, we put on the lens of capital, and we try to tease out the arguments there. And then the next step is for students to organize their ideas and make claims about inequality using Bourdieu's capital. So, this doesn't necessarily mean that the students are writing 4 paragraphs. Okay, but it's a way for them to see that, hey, I did all this analytical work. Now I'm going to use my disciplinary framework of Bourdieu's capital to organize and present my ideas. So that means that I need to make some sort of claim about inequality and economic capital, inequality and social capital, inequality and cultural capital, and perhaps together with all of them, some claim about social class reproduction, because these are the key elements of the framework. And then, of course, the students will have to support this with evidence from the text. Okay, so we really try to, visualize this process of analysis with students. Otherwise, we just get, this is what I read about inequality. I'm going to tell you everything that I know about inequality. Or this is what I know about Bourdieu. So I'm going to give you definitions of economic capital, social capital. But the students are not doing the analytical work of putting together, the framework and all the knowledge that they have about inequality. So we do this with this synthesis assignment, and then we do this with a problem analysis assignment. And a problem analysis is very similar to a case analysis that they write in their business classes or in their information systems classes, in which the students are provided a case, a business, accompanied by the teachers, and the students have to apply disciplinary frameworks to study it. So in this case, the students choose a problem that exists in society related to inequality, a case of their own, okay, and then they have to study it through the lens of what we learn about inequality and capital. So here is an example of how we help students write analytical and argumentative discourse at the paragraph level, because we have to see this at the whole text level, but we also have to see what students are doing at the paragraph level. And we found that breaking the paragraph, teaching this model where the students say, hey, this is what I know about inequality. This is what I learned about in this class. This is on the right, this is what I know about my case. In the case here, it's a sample case that we used in the class about the SATs in Chile and how they represent the high levels of inequality that exist in Chile. And from what I know about inequality, from what we read in class, from what I see in the case, based on my research about this, I can make conclusions about the Chilean SATs. So an analytical paragraph will move between, waves that represent knowledge about the discipline, in this case, inequality, knowledge about the case, but uniting them, making conclusions in which I use both sources of knowledge. So we work a lot on paragraphing with students to help them move towards meeting genre expectations. Otherwise, if we don't do this, we can get lots of paragraphs in which the student tells me a lot of things about Chile, and the SATs and this and that, but it's not linking it to issues of inequality or capital as we are working on this semester. So we find this to be a very powerful visualization and a very powerful way to go. And we work a lot with the students that the I know, the I conclude, and the I see moves, they don't have to happen all in this order, like in this sample paragraph. And we talk about lots of different patterns that they can use to show their analytical reasoning. And we give them language to be able to do that, okay? And as Tom said, and going back to what Anne was saying, we help our students also interrogate the assignment, okay? So when, students, we teach these questions that whenever students are presented with an assignment, they have to ask themselves, hey, am I being asked to display knowledge or to transform knowledge? Do I have to use any kind of disciplinary framework? And if so, which one? And do I have to use analysis in order to evaluate or make a claim, so write an argument? Otherwise, if students don't know that, they might be presented with all these questions, and these are questions that we're taking from history and information systems, and you can see that students are sometimes asked to describe, sometimes to analyze, and sometimes to argue. So we study these prompts with the students, and then on the next slide, we see a big question where students are asked to do multiple things. And if we don't break this down for students, they might stay at the description level. And then of course, when they get their grade, the professor said, but you didn't analyze, but you didn't, justify any of this. So we try to break down what it means to justify and what language is needed to do that. Okay, so that's what we're working on right now, and we are happy to share more in the Q&A. Thank you.
And I'll just say I didn't get on the slide, but the see, know, conclude was something that we adapted from Jing Hao's work. So got no citation on there, but just wanted to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. That's a great tool. Let's turn it over to Chris for our final chapter. And then we'll open it up for some questions.
Yeah, thanks much. I'll keep my comments pretty short because I think having the Q&A is really, really important. But my chapter focuses on graduate student writers, but there's a lot of similarity between what Dana and Hogan were talking about in their chapter and what I'm talking about in mine. And I'm coming at it from the perspective of a lot of students who have had these opportunities to go to pre-sessional language programs that still, for some reason, teach students the 5-paragraph essay format, and tried to convince the students that 5-paragraph essay writing is actually going to help them in their graduate writing. Even though they never say how that's going to happen, even though our graduate students will never read anything that looks like a 5-paragraph essay. For the most part, I have never seen a 5-paragraph journal article. If there is one, please send it to me. I would love to see that. So I have a lot of students who are very familiar with these standard formats, 5-paragraph essay being one. Another template that's out there is the templates that are for GRE writing. And for many of my students, that's been their primary use of, or primary way of writing in English for academic purposes. So either a template or some kind of 5-paragraph essay format. And of course, we all know that that doesn't really help you very much in graduate school. If you think about the things that students actually do need to be writing in grad school, you can see, right, this is just a smattering of the kinds of things that students are going to need to write. Certainly, then there are also the spoken genres, but that's a whole different kind of issue. If you think about just the research article genre, you know, everything is clustered, everything is linked. It's rare that one thing exists in isolation. And things get really, really complicated as students go up the genre ladder. So, you know, the main point that I wanted to get across in my chapter is that there's really nothing that you could teach in a 5-paragraph essay format that you can't teach using the genre format, genre approach. And it just is so important for us to make it clear to those in pre-sessional programs, those doing any kind of college, graduate school writing preparation coursework for students, that it's important to actually give students this sense of knowing what to write, when to write, to whom to write, and in a sense, what are you trying to get in your writing? That's the whole point of genres, right? That's how we do the work of our disciplines. That's how we get things done in academia. We don't get anything done in a 5-paragraph essay other than we get a homework assignment written up, and that's it. And as Dana and Hogan pointed out, transfer from that is just, it's just not effective in any way. So that was one of my main points, is to really focus on all the rich knowledge students can develop if we take a genre approach to writing in terms of figuring out how to write to get what you want. And I have a story in there about one of my students, and she's very typical of many of my students that are struggling to get beyond the 5-paragraph, and they get the idea of genre. They get the idea that a research article isn't a 5-paragraph essay. So they're not struggling so much with the 5-paragraph, but what they're struggling is with some of these little voices in their heads from their previous writing instruction that prevent them from actually doing what they need to do. And one of the main things, and I agree with Anne on this, is just having an idea of who you're writing to. So many students are working in interdisciplinary areas, and they don't know what their own identity is. They don't know who they are. They don't even understand how to argue their points so that they can participate in a conversation that's ongoing in their discipline. Not necessarily a conversation that's out there, let's say on sustainability, which is one that exists in environmental studies and engineering, public health, a whole host of areas. But how do these conversations take place in their own disciplines, and the importance to tap into an ongoing conversation in their field, which is something that you're not going to get if you're learning a 5-paragraph essay format or learning other templates. But again, there's a conversation out there, and how do we help our students know how to enter into these academic conversations? I've suggested, you know, that we set up kind of task-focused genre classes focused on writing. So why not have classes that are focused on writing for the job market, as an example, or other kinds of clusters of writing that we might see the students needing to do. I think, again, I agree that no one writing class can be one thing for everyone, but certainly a foundational course that gives students the awareness that they need can be helpful. And then go farther than that and have these very task-oriented genre clusters that we delve into in writing classes along the way, right? So I know we're short on time, so I'm going to stop there, but I welcome any questions that any of you might have, but I think it's good for me to stop there, so there's time for Q&A.
Thanks, Chris. Since we have such a small group, you know, feel free to unmute your mic to ask your question. But of course, if you're not comfortable doing that, the chat box is always an option. Let's open it up to any of your questions. I'll just piggyback off of Chris then, just to get us started. I'm curious if, Chris, if you've had the opportunity to teach any of those like task genre focused courses or micro courses.
Yeah, I have a tiny little bit as a part of my class. Let's put it that way, right? So one of the main classes that I teach has got this crazy name, Writing for Publication and Dissertation Writing, which, you know, I think it was named by someone ages ago to capture as much as possible. But what I do is I give students a choice of what we're going to work on. And inevitably, every couple of years, there's this cluster that fits beautifully together where I have a lot of students on the job market. So this year, for example, we're going to have about a month on teaching philosophies, diversity statements, CVs, cover letters, and research statements. It's a lot to do in a month's time, but it's really amazing because students get it and they need feedback, and their own advisors aren't able to actually spend enough time with them. My dream actually would be to have a semester-long course that would be focused on the genres of the job market, and then I would also include a speaking component where students are giving their job talks and things like that. So that has worked extremely well when it happens, that everybody has an interest in that. So that's one example that I can offer.
I'd like to ask a question of my, thank you very much, all of my, our colleagues here. You did a great job. I'd like to ask, what is one, if you had a new teacher, a new, you know, person teaching, what would you say they must do in a writing class that's successful? In other words, what is a core value, a core task? Dana, what do you think? Dana and Hogan, what is a core task? What's one thing that you must do in a writing class that defeats the 5-paragraph essay? What do you think?
It's hard to just pick one.
Yeah.
But I would say that making students aware of the, not just making them aware, but showing models, working with them on just the elemental concept of genre, and then audience together. Yeah, that has to happen in every single class, in different ways, depending on the level of the class and the goal of the class. Like I teach a legal advanced writing class. It's a legal writing class, and genre and audience issues are going to be different for that than for an EAP class for first-year students. But yeah, I would say just sort of making them aware of those two concepts and of course they're already aware, they just don't know what to label them.
Right. They don't know how to talk about
social media genres, they know school genres, they just don't know to call them that. So
you want to add something to that, Hogan?
I'd just say, I think it's been touched on a lot. Selfishly, what I want students to recognize is that a reader has to put in time and effort to read their work. And I can frame that humorously with students, but I really want them to walk away and understand that when they give something to someone to read and say, you need to read this, that's an aggressive act. That's taking the time and energy of another person. And I think that helps them understand audience awareness in a light that it requires them to think about time and energy.
Interesting.
Yeah, if I could piggyback on that one exercise I do in this legal writing class, we're talking about personal statements for law school applications. And I always start that with, okay, what kinds of things do you as a reader like or not like? What is, what makes you want to keep reading? What is a deal breaker? And that starts getting them thinking as readers about, oh, this kind of writing really irritates me, or I really like it when a writer does this. And that's kind of a nice way into respecting the reader, considering the reader, is to think of themselves as readers before they think of themselves as writers.
A lot of audience talk. Sylvia and Chris, do you want to go ahead and Sylvia?
I have something, yeah, just because it fits so nicely with what Dana has suggested. I think it's actually really helpful to come into the classroom with the idea of presenting a genre students have not likely seen before, but is out there. So I've had a lot of luck, for instance, talking about academics fraud and scandals and things like that, and bringing up this idea of a retraction notice. And I said, okay, let's say the most famous person in your field has now been accused of academic fraud. And there's this thing called a retraction notice. What would you want to find out if you read that retraction notice, right? And they all say, oh, I want to know why, and I want to know who, and I want to know what, you know, I want to know how big it all is, right? And then I show them one where it just says, blah, 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 paper has been retracted. That's it. I said, how does that make you feel? And they're all just really, really frustrated because they want to know the dirt, right? They want to know exactly, well, did someone lie? Did they make a mistake? What happened, right? And I said, okay, right, here you were a reader. You have this expectation. And you've been totally disappointed by this, right? So, okay, what would you have wanted to see if this one line thing doesn't work, or if it's just the first page of the article with big red letters retraction on it, right? What would you have wanted to see instead? And so bringing in something that also connects to the things that are important in academia, like a retraction statement, are really, really powerful, I think.
She has some great articles that do this. Silvia and Tom, what about you? What are the most, what do you think are the most important? What would you say to a new teacher? You must, or it's really important that you, what do you think, Tom?
I would say, like, to be able to give students a particular language to talk about what's working in a genre or what's not working in a genre. So,
Okay.
so to get, when they're analyzing it, a model or not model, to get beyond just very vague kind of descriptions of I don't like it, or you know, this is confusing, or this kind of murky language, and get them to really bear down on what features of the language and organization are making it successful for that audience or not. I mean, I totally agree with everything everyone said in terms of audience and real text and getting them to think about the readers. But that's one thing I would add.
Good. Silvia?
We are SFL people, so we are after the genre and the language. So I think teaching the students the meta language that they need to talk about the genres is very, very important. So in our crazy class here about inequality, we do a lot of work with genre awareness, and the students actually do a CGA, a comparative genre analysis. And that's in preparation for, we did a lot of academic reading and academic writing. And then, you know, following up on Dana's work, the last assignment is an open letter. So, you know, we have to move the students, you know, they become very aware of the features of academic writing, but then we get into public discourse, and we try to get the students aware of the differences and the kind of features that they will, the kind of features of public discourse that they will need for their open letter. And it's a little hard because students are like, oh, we analyze this and they're different. One uses, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know, one is objective and the other one is not objective. So then we have to do a lot of work on that.
A lot of work. I have a big sign on every week that says, noticing. What do you notice? What's going on here? That's my point. In other words, what are you seeing? And I'm trying to give credit to students who may see something very different from me, but it may be some kind of insight, as long as they can talk about it and use the language of analysis to look at what they're noticing. I think that's maybe the secret of the kind of work we do. Anyway,
Yeah, we've got a question.
We have one question. Oh, sorry, Betsy.
Basim, yeah, I was just gonna say, Basim, if you wanna turn on your audio and ask your question, go ahead.
Yes, well, I would like to thank all of you for this wonderful session. And I had the pleasure to read this insightful book. And I wrote a book review about it, and it's going to be out soon, within a couple weeks. So just my question is, I read the book and I couldn't find, only in 2 chapters, I guess, in chapter 2 and chapter 8, about corpus linguistics. coming from this perspective, especially for graduate students, in your opinions, what do you think? Do you think the corpus linguistic has role? I mean, the corpus linguistic approaches, do these approaches have role in changing practices to move beyond the 5-paragraph essays? I'm talking about graduate writing. So I don't know. Is there any thoughts about corpus linguistics and changing this kind of practices?
Want to say something about that, Chris? Is that, since you're our graduate?
Yeah, I was afraid you're going to pick on me. So I mean, corpus linguistics is wonderful. There's no doubt that we're learning so much about how language works, and the tools are becoming increasingly powerful to the point where I don't even understand them anymore. I'll be very honest with you. I'm not a Python programmer, but apparently Python, you know, is pretty powerful in shedding light on a lot of different aspects of language. But I mean, I would still have to question why you would want a 5-paragraph essay anyway. Because I mean, I don't know what corpora you would be tapping into to inform the teaching of 5-paragraph essays. We don't have a corpus of 5-paragraph essays out there that would be useful in any way. So I think, you know, combining the best of all the approaches that we have right now and all the knowledge that we have right now, if it's corpus linguistic, genre, rhetoric, rhetorical genre studies, SFL, whatever is working for you in terms of helping your students do the kind of academic writing that they need to do, that's what we should be using. And in the end, the 5-paragraph essay just doesn't feed into that, in my own opinion. So yeah, students love using corpus tools. They love analyzing using AntConc and other tools that are out there. So yeah, we should use them, but then we should use them in conjunction with a genre approach to writing, in my own opinion, especially for grad students.
Thank you.
I don't see any other hands raised or questions in the chat box, and we're at 1 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of all of your time. I know, Tom and Sylvia, it's late for you. Thank you all so much for being here. It's good to see you all. I think
And our next book club is scheduled for November 12th.
Yeah,
and it'll be a little bit early or later in the day. Not so early for me.
I think we need to thank Sarah and Betsy for putting this together. I certainly learned a lot, and I hope that, even though I've read the chapter several times. So thank you so much for doing this, and we'll see you at the next meeting, huh?
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.